And so if you're really on this journey to really know people better and understand people better and want to build stronger relationships with people, I think empathy is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
And I think we are coming in a place where there's two extremes of this, no empathy or extreme empathy. Mm-hmm. And so I've noticed that just in society in general. So Taryn, in our last episode, we were talking about awareness of self. Mm-hmm. So in this episode, we're talking about awareness of others and how being aware of other people can help in communication, and also being aware of others can help when other people are miscommunicating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes we are so focused on ourselves that we maybe forget to think about maybe what the other person you're in a relationship or someone you work with, a colleague, what they might be going through and how that can impact maybe the communication flow. And so we just get caught in our own bubble so much.
Yeah, I think the culture does that too, because we're very self-involved.
Yeah.
But one of the things I always tell people is if you're wanting to be aware of other people, one of the things you can do, if there's somebody you're usually having regular communication with, and you notice that communication kind of changes, and there's been a shift or a change, that to me is like a light bulb going off. Mm-hmm. Something's happened. Mm-hmm. Something's going on. And so the communication has shifted. Spousal relationship would be a good one to be, the way you talk to somebody and then all of a sudden you get abrupt answers. Mm-hmm. There's something's changed, right? And so when I'm at work and I'm looking, okay, I feel like this person has changed in the way they've communicated with me, something's going on.
Yeah, or if it's just even their behavior that's changed, maybe they are coming in when they get to work and they're like avoiding people, right? That might be a clear sign that something's going on because they're trying to avoid any opportunity to have a conversation. And I think as communicators and talking about being aware of others are there different patterns that have changed? Is their behavior changing? Are they the way they're speaking? Does it look different? And just being able to be cognizant of like, what does their environment maybe look like?
Absolutely. I think you told me a story about when you first moved to the South and how the miscommunication that happened just because of the cultural impact of what happened when you moved here.
Yeah. So I went to work in restaurants. And if any of you have worked in restaurants, like, have you ever worked in restaurants? You worked retail.
Yeah.
That's what it was. I think everybody should go through like some type of job with retail or restaurant because there's so many life lessons and whatever. That's a whole tangent. But yeah, I moved to the South and I couldn't understand people. I could not understand people. I had to ask them to repeat their food order to me 3 times before I could understand things. And I've traveled, like I've lived in different places, but I just had a hard time understanding people in the South. But then the other thing, which I think you're talking about though, is when people would say something like, "Oh, thanks, honey." Like, why are they calling me honey? I'm not your honey. And it offended me. Like it really made me angry. Like, why are they calling me honey? Or, "Oh, sweetheart, thank you." I'm like, I'm not your sweetheart. And a matter of fact, I actually told a couple people off. I did. It was bothersome. I'm like, please don't call me that. I'm not your sweetheart. I don't appreciate it. And don't call me that. And I even actually had a customer one time. I think I was pretty abrupt with him. And he's like, I'm sorry. And I was just like, don't speak to me that way. But the thing is that because I wasn't from the South and he took offense to my reaction. I took offense to him calling me honey or sweetheart. And it wasn't him trying to, be schmoozy or anything like that. It was just that was his culture.
Absolutely. And that's the opposite awareness of others. Okay. That's the opposite awareness of others. So yeah, because I think if you were to yield in that moment now and be like, okay, they're from the South and this is just how they talk, you won't take so much offense to things.
Yeah, that was a different season of my life.
Yeah. So that's interesting because I feel like people don't want to understand. Mm-hmm. So like, when you go up north, they're a little bit more abrupt, not as detailed. Here, they're a little bit more long-winded, a lot more like they've known you a long time, talking to random people. I've had people, I remember one time I went to City Hall to get the electricity or some of the utilities turned on a house that my parents were building. And I got there, the lady was like, "Oh, I got to give you this recipe for this casserole I made." And me and my brother were like, okay, like I'm 19. I guess I could make a casserole. I've never made a casserole, and she gives me this recipe for a casserole. And I just thought, this was such a weird encounter. Like this
so
is
random.
Yeah, it's so random. But that's her way of being kind and welcoming.
Right.
Even though I wasn't able to receive it that way, I just thought it was odd.
Yeah.
I thought this was the oddest thing I've ever seen. So it's that yielding of, okay, like what's changing? What's changed? Like if you're changing cultures, if you're changing an area, what's the local? Like, so just being aware that other people are trying to communicate, they're trying to connect. When they're calling you honey, they're trying to make a connection there, but you didn't understand that. And
yeah, I definitely didn't understand the connection, because the only honey and sweetheart was what I saw people referring to as their spouse, or, you know, like a dear loved one. And this is a complete stranger, you know, to me in a restaurant, but that's just the culture.
Yes. So another point with awareness of others is you don't have to know all the details. And so I'll go back to my work experience for this. Sometimes when you see that people are communicating a little bit differently, that doesn't mean you need to know the whole story of what's going on. Sometimes just wanting to communicate with them is, hey, their home life might be crazy, or maybe something happened, or you don't need to know the whole story. And so I think people think, well, what's going on? What's happening? I need to know the details in order for me to meet this person in a place to communicate with them. And the honest truth to that is you don't. You know, and so if I have someone working with me and they come into the office and all of a sudden I notice there's a change, and maybe this person's not ready to talk about it. Maybe they don't want to discuss it. Maybe it is a diagnosis. Maybe someone's died. Maybe they're in a breakup. Maybe there can be so many things that are happening. And to want to communicate with them and meet with them in a place and be like, I want to understand you and I want this to go well, this relationship to go well, but I don't need to know everything about the details of what's going on with you, to know that you're short, you're abrupt, and that's okay. And that's not against me personally.
Yeah, I think back to just like different office and environments that I've worked in, and sometimes there's almost like this gossip that goes on in the workplace, and people want to know all the details, but the reality is we don't have to know all the details, and that person may not be wanting to share all their personal details or what's going on, or if there's been a death in the family, maybe that's why they want distance and they don't want to engage in conversation, or they don't want to go to coffee. I think sometimes it's okay to have like things separate, and so often it's like we want to almost pry a bit. And if someone's going through something, just knowing like, hey, there's something going on here and being aware of it, but not asking for all the details is okay.
Yeah. And I think culturally for us, I know when I was growing up, we didn't bring our home life and personal stuff to work. And so there is a group of people that's, you know, are still like that. They don't want all their personal stuff known at the workplace. And some people are comfortable with it, but we need to be able to respect that. And so that shouldn't hinder us from wanting to communicate with them and also be somewhat understanding of what's happening.
Yeah. We just recently talked about lenses too, and like how you grew up and different experiences that gives you a different view or a different perspective on things. And I think that rings true to this too, is like not everybody wants to bring all of their personal business to share with their coworkers, and that's okay.
Yeah. So the third point we have is taking ownership to get clarification without making people feel belittled. So talk to me a little bit about that, because I know you have some strong opinions on how that needs to be handled in order to get more
strong opinions. I probably have a lot of those. I'm working on that. So yeah.
So explain that to me a little bit. Like, what does that really mean?
So I guess it's about getting clarification, right? And when you and I were talking about this, I was thinking about, you know, some of the different experiences I've had is in sales. And so when you're talking with a customer, you're wanting to understand something, you might listen, take in all the information, and you'll pause and listen, and you might repeat it back to them and say, hey, just so I'm understanding everything, because I want to make sure we're on the same page, we're going the same direction together. You're going to repeat that back to them and say, okay, so I understand X, Y, Z, and this is the goal we're trying to accomplish. Is that correct? And I think that kind of approach can also translate to our communication and relationships. And that is, you know, if it's a spouse relationship or if it's a colleague or a family member, is, you know, sometimes I think we're quick to maybe take offense instead of understanding from someone else's perspective. And so what we can do is just say, hey, you know, I'm looking at things a little bit different, but I want to see your point of view. So walk me through that again so I can understand.
So do you feel like people don't take ownership and don't attempt to get clarification? Is that what you're saying? Do you feel like that's common?
I mean, I do. I think sometimes people don't take ownership to get clarification. We go back to a conversation we had just recently on another episode about being aware of ourselves. Is we're not cognizant of it, and we're just like assuming something without asking. And so if you're not taking responsibility to ask those questions, you can actually avoid a lot of miscommunication if you're asking questions of clarification on the front end, right? Does that make sense?
It does. I think as a person who asks clarifying questions, it's my natural organic.
But not everybody does.
Yeah. So I think that's where I'm confused. So somebody who's not wanting to ask clarifying questions, what would prevent them from doing that?
It could be that they don't want to look uninformed, right? They don't want to look uninformed, or that they don't want to look that they're not knowledgeable about something. So think about the workplace. You don't want to ask clarifications to your boss because they might think that you're not qualified for the project. And in reality, it might just be that you need a little bit more direction on what the full scope of the project is. And so you're not asking the questions. So I've seen in my experience, and just speaking for myself too, is that you might be in a position where you feel intimidated. So you'd rather not ask questions. And I think that as a good communicator, we need to be aware of those type of situations and be okay with asking the questions. And sometimes some environments are more intimidating than others with, let's say you have a group of colleagues and you're in like a meeting format and you don't want to be like the one person out of the 25 raising your hand asking clarifying questions. I get that. But maybe it's after the meeting, you're going to your boss and saying, hey, these are the different notes that I took down about this initiative, just so I understand and we're all working towards the same direction. Am I understanding this correctly? Like those types of things.
So I think, first of all, I would totally be that person in a room of 25 people asking clarifying questions. So in order to better understand someone, when they're explaining something to me, it is in our best interest to ask anything. I'm not filling in the blanks myself. Right. So I'm not going to fill in the blanks myself, and I'm going to be like, wait, so is this what you're saying? Mm-hmm. Is that what to get more understanding and clarification? Is that what?
Yeah. Another point of that, the other point of having someone else like reiterate the information or what they're trying to accomplish is that they're making it clear for themselves too. So when you think about sales, if I'm trying to sell you a product, I need you to hear yourself say, yes, that's what I need. So you're stating the need and then you're saying yes. And so then when I come back and give you the solution or the recommendation that you need, you already know that the need's there because you've admitted the need after I've clarified it with you.
So let's take that into a personal relationship standpoint. Okay. So let's say I'm talking to somebody in a personal relationship, a close friend, a friendship, or even a loved one or spouse, and they're saying something. It would be beneficial for me to clarify. So you're saying you feel this way. Mm-hmm. Are you saying you feel this way when I do this? What if they're not really clear about that when they're expanding that? So, or how do I get to a point where I have those type of conversations? Or what would prevent somebody from not wanting to ask?
Not wanting to, well, I'm thinking of the other person too.
Yeah, sure.
Is they might not want to take ownership of their emotions.
Sure.
So they don't want to clarify. So they're going to avoid, they're not even going to want to answer that question because then that's going to make them self-reflect on what they just said.
Correct. Wow.
And so part of it is taking ownership and asking the clarifying questions. But then if the other party doesn't want to clarify, like, yeah, you really made me really angry. Like what you said, I totally disagree with. And I'm so mad at you right now. And so when you go in and like, wait, hold on, let me understand. They're so caught up in their emotions that they don't want to admit the anger.
Sure.
So part of that might be why they don't want to engage and answer it.
That makes sense. So our last point is empathy. It's your favorite one.
It's my favorite one.
Yeah. So empathy, when wanting to understand other people think empathy is agreeing with the other person, but it's actually not agreeing with another person. Mm-hmm. Empathy is standing from a posture of, I don't maybe agree with you, but I understand the difficulty or the pain or what you're going through, but it's not necessarily I agree with the way you're solving that problem. And I think what happens with people who don't have empathy is they come to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So what that looks like is I feel like you can go into conversation with somebody and you're trying to solve all their problems for them, and you're not being aware of the fact that they're hurting or in pain, and you think solving the problem is somehow going to help the situation, but really there's an emotional side to that and there's a practical side to what's actually happening.
Yeah, when you said, empathy is, this topic, I think about different seasons of my life. And we talked earlier about capacity too. And, I think in different seasons of our life, our capacity to have empathy for people changes. And, I think part of that too is when we become aware of ourselves in different seasons that we go through. But the empathy thing, I think sometimes it is hard. When I think about, who it might be hard to empathize with, sometimes it's our spouse.
Yeah. I have this quote that you wrote, I wrote down when we were talking about this.
What is it?
Empathy is hard when you see a cycle of stupidity. And the same applies when the other person sees you doing stupid things. It's hard to be empathetic when you see somebody doing the same thing over and over again and you think it's stupid.
Yeah. Well, and part of it is like with someone who you have engagement with all the time, which most of the time that's your spouse or a family member, or maybe it's a colleague. And so sometimes your level of empathy is just like drops.
Yeah.
But if we want to be healthy communicators and be aware of ourselves, we have to get to a place where we can be empathetic because, we were talking earlier today just about some of this personal stuff that I've got going on. And it's like, you get so frustrated sometimes that you forget okay, I do have to continue to be empathetic and love this person, even though I'm really frustrated.
Sure.
And so our actions and our words change. But at the same time, if we don't take ownership in how we are learning to be empathetic towards another person, you can do more damage. You know what I'm saying?
I think we can also rationalize solutions and try to solve their problem. And I've noticed that when I lack empathy, and what are they doing? They should have just done this, this, and this. And I would have solved it. I wouldn't have said that. And
I know.
We start saying all these things about what they should have done, could have done, how they should have handled it.
Well, it's like you're the fixer. And I'm that way too. I'm like, oh, I got to fix it. No, same thing. I would do it differently. I have to tell you about this story. Can I tell you a quick story?
Yeah.
So we went on vacation recently, and I'm always the person to pack the car because I have a certain way that I'm going to pack the car. It's like Tetris, right? You make everything fit in there perfectly. And we packed the car together before we went on vacation, and it was like midnight. We've got stuff up on the top. We got bikes, we got all this stuff. And it was fine, but it was a headache, and it's like midnight. We got maybe 5 hours sleep. So we were leaving for vacation. It was fine. It was time to pack up from vacation and come home. And my husband says, "Are you gonna help me pack the car?" And I'm like, "Just pack the car. Just pack the car." I didn't want to control it. I didn't want to control the situation. I'm like, "Just pack the car." So he packed the car and got it done. And he's like, "Wow, you weren't going to tell me which way I needed to pack the car." And I said, "Well, I know you can handle it." And so in that moment, I was like, I don't have to do it my way all the time. I don't need to take on that stress of doing it the way that I know is right. He can pack the car. We only lost one boogie board. We did go back and get it, but it was fine. It was fine. But it's just a small example of sometimes we try to do it our way and think that that's the only way to do it. And, let other people do it too.
Sure. And there's multiple ways to get to a destination, right?
Right.
So it doesn't have to be, my way is usually better, but that's irrelevant, right? That's not the point.
That's not the point.
Yeah.
Good communicators, you can't always be right. You just can't.
Yeah. And you're not right. And there are other ways. And some things, we have to have it done a certain way, but there's no harm in doing it another way as well. I think empathy also, what people don't understand is you don't need to have an understanding of something to even have empathy.
That's true.
And so people will be like, I don't understand that, so therefore I can't empathize with them. And it's like, well, empathy doesn't have to go together.
Well, you can still care for the person, right? Even if you don't agree with them.
Yeah. And so you can say, I don't really understand this. I don't know what's going on, but I get that you're going through a difficult time, or this is difficult for you, and therefore this is hard. And so I allow some level of grace there for even communication. I don't know why this is bothering you so much. It wouldn't bother me, but I don't need an understanding of that. That's what I'm saying. And so if you're really on this journey to really know people better and understand people better and want to build stronger relationships with people, I think empathy is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
And I think we are coming in a place where there's two extremes of this, no empathy or extreme empathy. And so I've noticed that just in society in general. And so I feel like we don't have a balance of, hey, I don't really understand what's going on, but I'm okay with that. Like I'm gonna try to communicate the best way I can and try to understand as much as I can. But if I don't get the whole picture, that's okay.
Yeah. And I think you have to be okay with that too, is you don't have to have full understanding of someone's situation to be caring and a good communicator to them. I think just gesturing, right? Having empathetic, mannerisms towards whatever situation is going on positions you to be a better communicator versus like being completely closed off to what they have going on in life.
Yeah. And it creates a safe space for them. So they know you don't understand. They know that there's something going on with them. They're fully aware of that, but you're allowing them to be them, and you're allowing them to walk that process out, whatever way that looks like. It may not be the way we would walk it out, but you're allowing them. So it does create a safe space for them. And I think it opens up more bridges in communication into building stronger relationships for sure.